Welcome everybody to this CALM ALM session. It's going to be around about CALM for implementation. My name is David Abley. I work for Sapphire Systems, and I'm currently running the S/4HANA Cloud practice at Sapphire. Just before I get into the agenda of the session, just to give you a quick minute on me and my background. So I've been involved in SAP since the late 80s. Worked on R2 initially, then R3, ECC, worked on some conversions from ECC to S4, ran some S4 projects, but for the last 18 months I've been focused on S4HANA Cloud, and we're currently in the middle of an S4HANA Cloud project in the UK with a company called Briggs of Burton. And this session is going to tell you about how we actually use CALM on that project. So I'm not a complete product expert on CALM, but I will tell you some of the lessons we've learned using CALM. Okay, if we look at the agenda that we're going to go through, quick introduction to the companies, then I'll talk about CALM for project management, how we used it for managing the project, how we used it for the fit to standard workshops in the sort of explore phase, if you like, of Activate, what we did and didn't use in the build phase, and then CALM for testing, how we used it for the test management, and then there's a summary slide at the end. Okay, as far as the introductions, Sapphire Systems, Briggs, and then the project that we're still in the middle of, we're due to go live in November, which is Project Bluebird. Okay, as far as Sapphire Systems, we're a sort of a mid-market SAP partner. We've actually been going since the 80s, so quite established in the UK, but also now with offices in the US and also in Mexico, Mumbai, and Manila. We're an SAP partner, of course, but we've also partnered with Infor. We also partner now with ServiceNow and Automation Anywhere. We're about 400 employees, 60 million turnover. But one of the unusual things I think with Sapphire is that we do provide SAP services to pretty much all the systems, from sort of small businesses with SAP Business One through SAP Business by Design, but also onto S4HANA and S4HANA Cloud now, where we're looking at sort of upper mid-market and large enterprise clients. So that's Sapphire as a group. As far as the customer is actually well known within the UK, Briggs of Burton. They're quite a traditional based mid-market company, but they're part of a group known as the CIMC group. And this group manufacture all sorts of solutions, if you like, for the consumer goods industry. And Briggs's role within that group is basically to provide solutions for process manufacturing. So they would provide the process manufacturing production lines. They would provide the equipment to manufacture certain products, whether it be within the food sector or the brewing and distilling sector. But they'd also provide equipment used for automation of those processes as well. So as well as the sort of discrete manufacturing side of things, there is actually some sort of software engineering that goes into this as well. So they're sort of a mid-market part of a group. They've been around a long time, established since 1740. So they're a very traditional based company, but very forward thinking. About 200 employees, but growing pretty quick, and currently expanding into the US and also with facilities in Mexico as well. One of the other areas that they specialize in is in distillery equipment. So they manufacture all the process manufacturing equipment to distill whiskey. in various locations around the world, specifically Scotland and Ireland. But you'll find that they produce all the necessary sort of metal goods, if you like, and systems that are used for distilling. They also have, they also have a subsidiary, Coppersmiths, which produces the huge copper stills that are used for manufacturing whiskey as well. So yeah, Briggs of Burton, very traditional mid-market company, but they're very much looking for a new system. They had a very old Oracle-based system which was running out of support, and in fact, they were literally down to a couple of people that could support it, and one of those guys wanted to retire. So they've been looking for a new system for a while and decided to move to S/4HANA Cloud, which is the public edition. And we've been working with them since the beginning of the year, started the project in April of this year. The project that we started, we named Project Bluebird. It was to implement S/4HANA Cloud Public, formerly known as Essentials. Typical sort of mid-market project, 8 consultants that were split between different functional areas, a technical consultant and project management. There was 8 business process experts from Briggs themselves. We found that these guys were stretched a little bit thin at times. They were also running the business as well. So it wasn't sort of 5 days a week full time on the project. We had to sort of cope with some sort of part-time involvement from the business process experts and also the consultants as well. They weren't 5 days a week either. It was mainly based in the UK, although there is some US entities as well. But most of the operations themselves happen in the UK. Like I say, it's going to be an 8-month delivery. We're due to go live in Q4 this year. We're just coming to the end of testing, and we're about to start our deploy phase next week, where we look at regression tests, but also the dress rehearsal of the data migration. It's very much a cloud mindset project, so very fit to standard. Briggs have totally adopted the approach of going with the standard SAP. As far as the functionality, you can see that most of it is actually finance. The project sponsored by the CFO, but it's very much projects and project finance. So the Briggs themselves basically produce projects to manufacture, but mostly install some of this process manufacturing equipment, mostly for the sort of brewing and food industry. Having said that, there is some small amount of manufacturing in this first phase to do with spare parts and what they call drums, which is basically barrels. And that is a kind of a precursor to a bigger manufacturing phase in the next phase. So initially, it's mostly around finance and projects. We decided to focus on EPPM rather than professional services. We spent a long time looking at both areas, but in the end, decided that we could meet most of the requirements with EPPM. And like I say, there's a small amount of supply chain for inventory management and the usual sort of procurement and sales areas as well, but fairly simple processes in those areas. The complexities are around EPPM and finance and project costing, margin analysis, that sort of thing. Okay, how did we use CALM on this project? Well, we broke it into a number of areas. The first one was project management. How did we use it for project management? Well, as you know, there's a number of different areas of CALM. The area that we're focusing on at the moment is the implementation. So on the implementation, we looked at how we can use it for projects and their tasks. And then we also used it for these other areas as well, including fit to standard design, requirements processing. And I'll walk through those now to show you how we actually use the product. So we started off with the dashboard. Obviously, to get the dashboard to look anything like this, there's quite a bit of setup required in the background. It doesn't take very long, but you do need to make sure that you've set the project up properly, first of all, in order to get the tiles to work and to get the information to be accurate. But this was quite a good way of seeing where we were from a project management perspective, as far as the number of tasks that had been completed on the project, what was overdue, what was assigned to me or assigned to a particular role on the project. So the quality of these tiles have been sort of increasing all the time. When we first started, there wasn't that many really, but now it's we've seen quite a few more being added in the last release. Next slide. Okay, so in order to get that dashboard, the first thing we had to do was set the project up. And that's just a simple case of going in and defining the timescales, the sprints, the milestones. And we had sort of a couple of sprints on the project for the within the realization phase. And then we had the various quality gates set up as well within CALM. The next thing we had to do was set up the team itself. And there's a number of standard roles that you get within CALM, which link to the roadmap, the S/4HANA Cloud roadmap. Now, for our project, because it was a relatively smallish project, we found that a number of the consultants and the BPEs were allocated to more than one role, more than one SAP project role, if you like. There is an option actually to edit those roles, if you like, and create your own, but we found it was better to stick with the SAP standard roles, because that sort of fitted in with all the other documentation, and it made it easier to filter things later on. So we decided to stick with the standard SAP roles, but we just allocated people to multiple roles. So we might have the same consultant who was the education expert as the change management, or the same guy doing extensibility as integration, and that worked out quite well. The other thing that we needed to do was set up the scope of the project in CALM. So it's a simple case of just saying which scope items are allocated to a scope category that you can define yourself, and then you can use that as a filter. Now, when we started, that scope was specific to CALM. It wasn't really linked to what was set up in CBC for configuration. But I think quite recently that's now changed, and there is the ability, or there is becoming the ability, to link the scope that's set up in CBC with the scope that's set up in CALM. But when we started, I don't think that link was there. The other thing that caught us out a little bit was that the scope that we defined in the DDA at the beginning, the digital assessment, that was separate as well to the scope we had to define in CBC and the scope in CALM. So there was like 3 separate places for the definition of scope, which we kind of only realized a few weeks into the project. Once we've set the project up, the next thing is to look at the tasks and the task management. And this is quite simple, really. Lots of filters. The tasks all come through from the roadmap. So when you set the project up at the beginning, you decide which S/4HANA Cloud roadmap to use, whether it's public or private. For us, it was public, so we pulled in the public roadmap. And then you can use this as your sort of checklist, as your project plan. So you allocate people to each individual task, and then you can filter that to see what's the status of those tasks. It is worth noting that each task is allocated to a deliverable, and these deliverables are pretty fixed, we found, but you can create new tasks if you like. So you can use the template tasks which come from the roadmap, but you can also set up your own tasks as well, so-called project tasks, if you want to add in extra tasks. In the end, we decided to stick with the standard tasks as much as possible, and try and keep to fit to standard as far as the roadmap, to try and simplify things. There's quite a lot of tasks, as you can see, in the roadmap itself. And you might need to scale that depending on the size of the project. Some of the tasks for us weren't relevant. So there is a status to say that it's not applicable or not relevant to that project. We found ourselves marking quite a few things as not relevant. Once you've set the tasks and you've allocated people to the tasks, obviously you can use the Gantt chart feature as well. It is fairly simple, the Gantt chart, to be honest. It doesn't really replace something like Microsoft Project, and it's not meant to. It's meant to be a fairly simple, easy to use Gantt chart to sort of visualize where the CALM tasks are and you know, whether it's been completed or not. There is no sort of critical path. You know, there's not much flexibility on the columns. You can't add any extra columns at this point. I think that probably change in the future. There's no real kind of capacity planning on the resources or anything like that. And it's a fairly basic Gantt chart, to be honest. We didn't really use it that much, it has to be said, because we actually had our own other system for managing time on project, because we have a timesheeting system we use that links into our project system. So we had to use that as well. So we ended up mirroring what was in CALM with what was in our kind of standalone project management system that we use for all our projects. One thing that kept us coming back to CALM for project management was the fact that you could drill down into a task and see the detail behind that task. Now that is a real big selling point. You can't really do that with Microsoft Project. I mean, you can download the standard project for the implementation from the roadmap viewer. But in the Microsoft Project, you can't have a look at the detail behind the task. And the good thing about CALM is you can click into the accelerators, you can click into the linked web pages. And we found that was invaluable. You know, one of the reasons we had, you know, problems on the project now and again is that people didn't really read this text in detail enough or go through the accelerators. So we kind of drummed that into the team as we went through the project, and we found that definitely increased the quality of the project. So that's sort of definitely something we would use again. The other thing that was really interesting as well is that there is a history as well. So when you set tasks to complete or make any changes to the task, that is recorded in the history. So you can see what's going on. The other thing that we used quite a bit was these comments as well. So behind each task, there was usually a list of comments and with dates saying, you know, how that task had been progressed. Unfortunately, you can only assign one resource to a task. And we found that lots of times within a task, there was lots of collaboration between a number of people. So we logged that in the chat history so we could see where that task was. And we used the assignee as the sort of owner of the task, and it was up to him to update the task. But behind that, there was usually 2 or 3 people that were working on that task. Okay, so that was the project management side of things. And that was working quite well. What about when we moved into the explore phase and into the fit to standard workshops? What we did there, we used the processes that get loaded into CALM. So you can use the Business Process Explorer, but if you set up which scope items are included in your scope, all the processes that you would normally see in Business Process Explorer are downloaded into this central repository. And you can drill down from each of these scope items into the diagrams, into the flow diagrams, by just clicking on this chevron here, which is obviously really useful when you're running a project. You can filter those things as well. So you can filter it by the particular scope or country that you're working on. So when you drill down into the diagram, you'll find that it's really useful in the fit to standard workshops, because you walk through the diagrams first so people can see the process flow, and then obviously you demonstrate that on the starter system, and you can flip back into CALM to show them whereabouts you are in the process. So we found that really useful. You can download these things to PDF or SVG as well, which we did. And sometimes you can stick things up on the wall if you like. You can also, from this particular part, you can actually create requirements as well. I'll come on to those in a second, but you can create requirements and notes as you're walking through the process flows in the Fit to Standard workshops. We did find that we still had to go into Best Practice Explorer or rapid.sap.com. And the reason is that right now, anyway, at the moment, the test scripts and the setup guides and even the tutorials were still accessed from Business Practice Explorer. So we still had to use that. It would have been far better if we could move the standard test scripts into Calm and be able to do everything from Calm. And I think that's coming. But at the time that we were using it, that wasn't available. But we still use this feature quite a lot. One of the features that came out in the middle of the project, and this was quite typical really, because Calm was being updated like every 2 weeks with small changes. We could see it sort of evolve in the project. So while we were in the middle of our Fit to Standard workshops, we see that there was a new option came out to author processes. So you could actually use this sort of basic authoring tool. Now, it's obviously nowhere near as good as some of the best the sort of best practice ones in a sense, some of the best of breed tools, but it's integrated with everything. And we found it useful to create what we call the value chain. So the processes within the scope items only kind of went so far as being end to end. They weren't really a complete value chain as we saw it. So we used this to set up the overview of the whole process from, inquiry through estimates, creating a sales order, creating a project, booking time to a project, and then looking at billing that project, and then closing that project, settling it and closing it down. So that sort of overall process, we drew some diagrams to represent that, because obviously that wasn't represented across scope items. There was no way to kind of link scope items together, if you like. So that's how we use that. The other thing we did in the workshops is we created subtasks. So going through the workshops, any actions that came out of the workshop, we created those as a subtask. That was really useful. We used the comments again to show how that subtask were progressing, because there's no real blueprint document. Going through the Fit to Standard, you show the diagrams, show the standard processes on the starter system, but when it comes to actually making notes or recording what actions, we use the Calm system for that, and that worked quite well. And we would definitely use that again in the future. The other thing we did, and if you look at this icon down here, is that we logged the requirements as well. So as we were going through the workshops, directly from the diagrams, we could create requirements. Now, we didn't actually create a lot of requirements because our emphasis was on Fit to Standard. So we weren't going to create, hundreds of requirements. The idea was that the company went with the standard processes and the standard software, and they were happy to do that. So we only logged what we considered like the top sort of 20 requirements. And they were the things that we knew we could customize, or that we knew it was easy to, slightly extend in certain areas, maybe in output management. But we didn't log, 100 requirements like you might do in a sort of large enterprise project. And that went quite well. And we used those later on for testing and tracking back to the requirements that we'd logged. The other thing we did in the Fit to Standard workshops is we used the notes feature of Calm. So again, this was really useful because, we had to log everything that came out of the workshops. We also had to log the key decisions that came out of the workshops as well. And we used the notes feature to do that. We had to kind of come up with a prefix for some of the notes. There wasn't really a category for notes. We would like to have seen a category so that we could categorize it. Maybe there was some, flexible category sort of feature so that we could categorize things as key decisions that were coming out of the workshops. Because we tried to avoid using spreadsheets at this point to do those sort of things. And obviously there was no blueprint document. So we did use that quite extensively. There's also a history of some of this stuff as well. And you can see, you know, how those things developed over time. I mean, even after the workshops, when decisions were made, even right up into the testing, we had to go back and update the key decisions that were logged in CALM and use that as our central repository. We also kept an eye on this icon here, which was the what's new icon, to see what was changing in CALM as we were actually using it throughout the project. So that's a sort of top tip to keep on top of any new features that are coming out. Okay, so after we did the design workshops, the next step was the build. Now, we didn't really use CALM that much for the build at this stage. We used the CBC system, of course, to do all the configuration. There wasn't much of a link between CBC and CALM. I know that's going to change, but at the time, you know, there was no way of seeing which configuration steps had been completed in CBC through CALM. You know, I had to log into CBC to do that. I think in the future that will change, which will be really useful. In the CALM task list, configure is just one, you know, is one task in the list. Now we know that one task can be broken down into lots of subtasks. So we had to use a sort of a spreadsheet for that. We had to use our own sort of tracker to see where we were on configuration. We did build 2 sprints in, and we did try and get to the solution walkthroughs as soon as possible. We found that the quicker that we got to solution walkthroughs and actually showed the system in detail and let the customer access the system as much as possible, the more clarity came out around the configuration options. We also found, you know, a number of things came out in testing, as they do, so that you know, the sooner we got to a form of testing on the system and let the BPEs test it using their data and their scenarios, then that was a better approach. But we didn't use CALM for build that much, to be honest with you. As far as testing, we did use CALM. I've used Solution Manager in the past for testing. I've also used quite a few tools from HP for testing as well, for test management. You know, we found that the testing side of CALM was definitely an advantage because it was integrated with everything else. And it was also, the sophistication actually has grown over the last 12 months as well. We decided to use the manual testing side of things. We knew that there was automatic or automated testing available, but the customer themselves wanted to get hands-on in the, let's call it the SIT and the UAT. So we actually broke testing into 2 areas, what we called SIT, system integration testing, and then UAT. So there was like 2 test cycles. Now, in the methodology, there's actually only 1 cycle for testing, and we felt that was a bit limited. So we used SIT, where the consultants were in the driver's seat and doing most of the testing, with the customer observing and learning how to test. And then when we went into UAT, obviously the roles were reversed, and the customer was in the driver's seat and the consultant was very much hands-off, just guiding them with the tests. And obviously at that point, we were using a lot more productive data, which was realistic. And we were testing the value chains and the end-to-end process in UAT. We're also using the right security roles in UAT as well. But we did set up the test cases in CALM. And it was quite an easy process, really. You select the scope item and it pulls in all the process steps below. So it actually pulls in what it calls activities. So every step that you'll see in the diagram, it pulls those into the test case for you, and you can decide whether those are in scope or not. You can change these test cases as well. So when you're in this test prepare mode, you can prepare the test cases, and then you flick a switch to say that test case is now ready for execution. And when you go into the content of those cases, you can see we prefix things with UAT because we had 2 cycles, SIT and UAT, and we switched off some of the steps that weren't relevant to us. But when you go into the detail of those test cases, you can specify what the instructions are, expected results, and set that test case up. You can even specify the data that should be used as part of that test case, which was quite useful. Then we made it active, ready for testing. And then we went into test execution. And this is where we could use multiple test runs. So you can test these test cases multiple times, and it will store those as different test runs, because sometimes we had to retest things. But eventually you can drill down into the test case and store the test evidence. So you can cut and paste a screenshot into the test case, test execution, to show that that's been passed. And then you can obviously set that to pass, which is what we did. We did have 1 or 2 automated tests, but to be honest, we've been using manual testing initially. We will be using automated testing for the regression testing. And we set that to pass, and then we could drill down into the detail for logging any of the evidence, which was quite useful. We also used some of the new analytic features that came out. We could look at the reports from test execution. We could look at requirements traceability, so you can link the requirements to a test case as well, and then see if those requirements have been tested and passed. So we did use that as well. One of the things that we couldn't use was this test plans. Now, I know test plans are in the roadmap, and I think they're due this quarter, but there was no way of linking test cases together. So the test cases, because they were aimed at scope item level, there was a few times where we needed to link scope items together to produce this value chain, and then do this end-to-end test, passing certain data across that value chain and using the output of one test as the input into the next, cross scope item and cross department. And there was no way to do that. And that meant we had to create a spreadsheet to do it. So we created a test plan spreadsheet that linked the test cases together, but then we executed the test cases in CALM. Now, I think that's going to change, but at the time we were using it, that wasn't available, unfortunately. But the analytics has improved. There's a few simple charts now. They're fairly basic, to be honest, but we use some of those. But we also use the graphics within Excel in our test plan sheet. So yeah, so that's how we use testing and how we use CALM for those other areas. How would I summarize it? I would say that CALM is definitely a must-use tool if we're implementing S/4HANA Cloud. Definitely, mid-market implementations. It's sort of trying to strike a balance between simple to use for those type of projects with some sophistication as well. If we made it as too sophisticated, then it would probably be too complicated for mid-market S/4HANA Cloud public projects. But the ability to be able to drill down into the task and see the accelerators, that is a real selling point for it, in my opinion, anyway. It is improving all the time as well. We found it, innovations were coming every 2 weeks. So you do need to keep track on what's changed to see if you can utilize that. The Gantt chart was very basic. Obviously, we had to use a separate planning tool to actually, visualize some of the tasks. We still use the task tracker to show the status, but it was a little bit basic in that area. The embedded process diagrams was really nice, but we could do with the standard test scripts in CALM as well, and the setup guides and the links to the tutorials. The build phase, that integration with CBC is needed so we can, synchronize the scope, but also see the process on what's been configured at a detail level. Test plans I know are coming, and again, that was a big area for us to have an end-to-end test plan. Defect management wasn't there, and again, that's coming. I think that's in Q4, so that will be needed. We had to use the separate defect management list, and it didn't have change requests in either. So we had to use another tracker for change requests. It would have been useful to have that in. But all in all, I thought, it was a good tool. We used it as much as we could. It tried to balance simplicity with sophistication. And we were only using it for implementation. I mean, let's not forget that, some of the other selling points of CALM is that it's used for not just implementation, but operations, services, administration. So, when you add that in as an integrated product, and the fact that it's improving, every month, then I think it is a good product, and we'll definitely be using it again on the next project. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. That's all my slides. I think we've got a few minutes left for Q&A.
Yeah, okay, if there's no questions, Dave, I'd like to thank you for the insights and also the open feedback, especially to the Gantt chart. I think this is probably also help us, to improve our product further. Yeah, so even
there is a couple of questions, Henrik, actually, I can see in the Q&A.
It was just some feedback. That was a feedback that it was a very good and interesting presentation, and also an excellent presentation. This was a feedback by some people. So there was a real question. So I think if you probably have later questions, there's also at 3 p.m. Meet the Experts. So there could be that you have questions later on to the project or to how to implement the S/4HANA Cloud with Cloud ALM, then you can also join later. There's one raised hand. Okay, now we got question. So probably it takes some time. Maybe I read them. Dave, and so there was 3 questions in Q&A tool. So how did you do the scoping in detail? Included also the scoping from DDA tool?
Yeah, so the scoping started right in the discovery phase, and at that stage, we were using the DDA, and we're going through the process of scoping meetings where we made sure we had the right people from the customer in the meetings, first of all, and we walked through the scope items, and they decided, whether that scope item was going to be in and out, and then we drilled down into some of the more detailed questions in the DDA tool and came up with an initial scope in the discovery, which was the basis of the DDA. But we did find the scope did change throughout the project. In a sense, there were scope items that the client thought they wanted that we included. But later on, when they saw what that scope item did, they realized it was too sophisticated for them and they didn't actually need it. So we did make a number of scope items out of scope in the project. But we had, when we changed the scope item, we used a change request for it. We had to keep CALM CBC up to date and in sync to have that. And we also had a scope statement, which is a document that you have to create in the prepare phase as well. So that's how we did the scoping.
Okay, many thanks for that. let me repeat the next question. In which phase of your project did you find SAP Cloud ALM most helpful?
Yeah, I think it's a toss-up really between project management, because the being able to drill down into the detail of the tasks was really useful, and test management, because the client didn't want to pay for a best of breed test tool like SAP ALM or something like that. It would have been too complex and too time consuming to use it. So yeah, for test management, actually the fit to standard workshops, going through the diagrams, was pretty useful as well. I would say probably test management was the best at the moment.
All right,
especially with
thank
the
you.
automated testing. Yeah.
The next question was, would you use Cloud ALM for a more complex implementation?
Yeah, I think we would. If it's S/4HANA Cloud, I think when we say complex, do we mean complex public cloud implementation, or would we use it for like a private cloud implementation? We definitely use it for public cloud. And I think that, the way the strategy is going, we would use it for private cloud as well. There's still a few little holes in there. We have to supplement with other things, but because it's integrated and it's an easy to use and set up tool, then yeah, we would use it as much as possible.
I think maybe because I just see numbers, so this person maybe also join our Meet the Expert session later, then we can more elaborate on what is complex implementation. Maybe that's also a good opportunity for later. Yeah. So a question from Kelvin is, did you activate any operations functionality during or as part of your go live?
Yeah, we're going to use Calm for operations as well, but because we're not live yet, we're still sort of coming to the end of our testing phase, the end of realization. We haven't really used it for operations just yet, but we will be using it for sort of interface monitoring, and also for regression testing as well. We're going to use it for that. So yeah, we do plan to use it.
All right. So a question from my colleague Thomas is, are you happy with the overall quality in terms of bugs, performance? Or do you have something to share here with us? Well,
there isn't really any bugs. We didn't find any bugs, to be honest. We found gaps in functionality where that we're on the roadmap that were coming. Things like defect management, change requests, things like that. But there wasn't really any bugs as such. It was everything that's there seemed to work fine. There was just things there that we would have liked that, are just on the roadmap at the moment.
All right, very good. Another one from Kelvin it's a bit a longer one. So how long did it take the project team to adapt Cloud ALM as a project delivery tool? This is one question. And the other one is, did you use the training in the tool itself or ask the users to go through the ALM Media Center?
Yeah, initially we did sort of initial work on it in discovery and then in the prepare phase. And it was mostly obviously the consulting team that spent time going through it. They went through some of the documentation and the training, and then they one-to-one with their business process expert, they kind of showed them how to use it. And I think in the end, it was mostly the consultants that was using it rather than the customer, to be honest. The customer used it for testing, but we had to show them how to use it. But it didn't take that long because at the moment, it's still fairly simple to use. So, they picked it up pretty quickly.
All right. Thanks a lot. I don't see any further questions. So okay. I would say we are good. to go. And yeah, I already said, if there are further questions, then you can also ask him later in the afternoon in the Meet the Expert. They are all people of the RISE sessions are attending this, including also Dave. So you are also then invited to ask further questions there.
Yeah, no problem.